And if the amendment has been distributed, I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Community banks and credit unions were perhaps not without sin in the last several years, but they certainly did not engage in the worst consumer abuses. They make the argument that for bigger banks, for bigger institutions, bigger institutions are accustomed to having examiners camping out there all the time, but for them it's a pretty big deal when the examiner comes to their bank or their credit union. It is very disruptive, and it does involve compliance cost. They make the point that adding an additional examiner and an additional examination will increase substantially, if not quite double, close to double their compliance cost. This amendment makes a distinction between banks of less than $10 billion in assets, which is all but about 2% or less than 2% of banks, and credit unions with less than $1.5 billion in assets, which is all but less than 2% of credit unions, and allows their examination and enforcement to continue to be principally with their safety and soundness regulator. So they won't be subject to an additional examination by CFPA. CFPA still has ample opportunity to make sure the law is enforced. They can include CFPA employees on the examination team. They can tell the examiners what kind of information they need, what they need to come back with when they go and examine a bank. And there will be, and they can make sure that violations do result in enforcement actions. They can request it of the examiner, of the safety and soundness regulator, and if the safety and soundness regulator doesn't do it, they can bring it on their own. And if the safety and soundness regulator just doesn't do the job, the CFPA can push him out of the way and take over with respect to a given institution. The CFPA will still get the information they need about what exactly is happening out in the marketplace where consumers come into contact with the financial industry. They'll get it by participating in the examinations through the consumer complaint process, which will go to the CFPA. And the CFPA can investigate and bring enforcement actions on their own for those violations brought to their attention through the consumer complaints, AG actions, private causes of actions, various filings, I hope including one that Ms. Bean and I are offering later, an amendment would create that. Information from bankruptcies that Mr. Grayson is introducing an amendment later that will provide that information. So the CFPA will be able to do the job, but it will not create a needless burden, administrative burden, on smaller banks and credit unions. I yield back.